All right, we begin. All right. So last we met, we were in the midst of. Good morning, Steve. We were in the midst of a discussion of Sif Hay in Rishon and Dalet. We had talked about the baking of bread and the question of whether you're allowed to put bread in the oven in the ancient ovens, and perhaps in some modern ovens as well. The way bread was baked was that it was placed along the side of it was stuck to the side of the oven, and it would bake in such a fashion. And then there would be a process called ridia in order to remove it. It would almost think of it taking a baking pan and scraping it off of the edge of the oven. And we had said that if at least one side of the bread had gotten a crust, the dough had formed a crust, a hard crust, then we are okay. We're good to go. We are able to we're able to allow that baking process to continue into Shabbos that began on Erev Shabbos. But if it started too late, where it could not form, where there was no krimas panim, where there was no crust that was formed prior to Shabbos, then such an action would not be allowed. And we had mentioned at the end of our last year that if it is done b'mezid, if it's done purposefully, meaning knowing full well this is not going to work out, that there will be krimas panim before the beginning of Shabbos, then you're not allowed to consume this bread on Shabbos, and you can't consume it. The Shulchan Aruch said, "Ad motzai Shabbos bechdei sheyeyasu." It would take, the amount of time it takes to bake bread, that amount of time after Shabbos ends. Okay, that was what we said last time. Now, let's go back in the Shulchan Aruch. I mean, it's on the second line of my edition on this page of Chav Vav, where it says the im b'shogeg. It's right around where Lamed Gimel, Sifkat and Lamed Gimel, is marked in the Shulchan Aruch. So let's take a look there in the Shulchan Aruch. The im b'shogeg, if it's done not willingly, meaning I thought it was going to bake a certain amount before Shabbos, but it turned out it wasn't that way. Or I didn't realize the halacha at the time, and then on Shabbos somebody told me the halacha. So it was b'shogeg. I didn't know the halacha and continue yet to do the thing that I knew was going to be wrong. Okay? Im ein lo ma yochal. If there is not anything for this person to eat, muter lo lirdos bimenu mizon shalosh seudos. A person is allowed to do ridia in the amount of 3 meals. And we'll clarify what does that mean. What is the context here? Can you have lechem mishnah for 3 meals? Is there a chiv of lechem mishnah at shalosh? We will get to that siman at one point. Whether or not you have to have bread at shalosh. Certainly for the first 2 meals you have to have bread. Seems as though it's a mitzvah to do so at the third meal, but maybe it's not a strict obligation per se. The omer la'acher, and I'm allowed to say to other people, she'ein lahem ma yochlu, who don't have, if I do it b'shogeg, and then there are other people. I have neighbors who I hear over here saying, I don't have challah this week. I forgot to go to the bakery. I didn't have time to bake the bread. I did bake the bread, but it burned. Whatever it is, they need food. They need bread. So you can say to other people, come and take what you need to eat. Bo uredu lachem mizon shalush seudos. Come and do ridia, scrape off the bread in the amount of shalosh seudos, 3 meals. Let's pause. Look at the Shulchan. The Mishnah Berurah, Lamed Gimel. B'shogeg, v'hadlo kansinan gam b'shogeg kemosh kasav b'sifches d'lo mechalkinan sham b'shogeg lamezid. So here we kind of wonder with a question at the beginning. Well, why are we differentiating between shogeg and mezid? We didn't have a kanas. We didn't have a penalty. Sorry, 1 second. What's the Sifches? Right, you'll see when we get to Sifches, which is a slightly different case. But there's going to be no differentiation between shogeg and mazid. Right, you're not allowed to consume it on Shabbos. We had even said, by the way, if you go back a simon, that when it comes to shehiyah, if one makes a mistake, you're really not supposed to consume it on Shabbos. The halacha was that you have to wait until after Shabbos. So here comes a very important qualification and caveat even to that halacha. Okay? So why do we not have no differentiation here, but we do over there? Sorry, right? There is a differentiation here, but not over there. The kaven de ein lo pas acher le'achol, since there is no other bread to eat, the efshar lekayem mitzvahs shalosh seudos below pas shari. And at the end of the day, it's impossible to mekayem the mitzvah of shalosh seudos, three meals on Shabbos without bread. Therefore, it is permitted to do this with shogeg. Whereas when we had the other cases, as he'll explain here about tavshil, when we're talking about just the food, not the bread aspect of it, ein chiyuv kol kach lechol b'Shabbos. There's no obligation that I have to eat, as much as it seems sacrilege to say this. There is no obligation to eat cholent on Shabbos. There is no obligation to have chicken on Shabbos. There is no obligation to have any of these foods on Shabbos. Bread is an obligation. And by the way, important to note here, he even throws in shalosh shudas here. He does not separate shalosh shudas. There is a mitzvah to have bread at shalosh shudas. If you don't, it's not said that you can't be mekayim shalosh shudas, the third meal, but really you should have bread. It's really b'di'evet to not have. It's not like I have a. I would say it's less about a choice as much as it is about that if I don't have bread available to me, so okay, I can still do shalosh shudas. Or if I'm overly full and stuffed, my stomach is like plotting, it's this time of the year, I'm having shalosh shudas at 4:00, and I just finished lunch 15 minutes ago. So okay, maybe there you'll have peiros, you'll have fruits for shalosh shudas, but really you're supposed to have bread. You're supposed to make it into a meal. Okay, that's why there's a difference here, because we're dealing with bread. The in hachinami. Now, this is a very important line that is not only about bread. Very important line. You should, I don't know if everyone takes notes and everything, or if you do, underline it with a pencil or whatever you're writing implement use, because this is important. The in hachinami. The im ein lo davar acher lechol klal ki im oso atavsha belvad shehisha b'shogeg. So mutar lo ochlo she'asa lihisanos b'Shabbos. K'mo shekasav siman reish pei ches. Look, it's true. If you don't have anything to eat, let's say we're talking about your food now, not your bread, and I will not have a lunch as a result of this, so I won't have dinner as a result of this if I follow through on the proper application of halacha here. Well, I did it b'shogeg. It was not with malice. It made a miscalculation. I forgot. Whatever it is, I am allowed to consume that food that was improperly heated up. Again, shehiyah is a rabbinic stringency, it's a rabbinic requirement, right? The laws surrounding it. Therefore, in a situation where I don't have anything else to consume on Shabbos, and there won't be a meal, so then it's mutter, and it's okay. You can eat it because there's another principle here, which is you're not allowed to fast on Shabbos. You're really supposed to feel comfortable on Shabbos. That way, you're like, oh, but you're not really in a tanis situation. If you really are so desperate, open the bag of Lay's potato chips, and you'll have Lay's potato chips for lunch. We're talking here about. I don't think we're talking about that it's, really I'm literally going to fast. Okay, that's one thing. I even think that if you only have as a bag of potato chips, and otherwise there's no lunch. My sense is that that's what we're talking. I don't know. Maybe it's literally have nothing to eat though. Siman Reish Peches, just to give you context, what he's referencing. Reish Peches is a din of a tanis chalon b'Shabbos, right? And it's an asur lihisanos b'Shabbos, right? You're not allowed to fast on Shabbos ad sheish shaos, until the 6th hour of the day. Even if you're davening, that's why there's a big hak about Rosh Hashanah. Some shuls after Shachas before Tkiyah Shofar, take a break for Kiddush, because that way they don't end up, lengthy. It should be a lengthy day where the davening goes on. They don't eat until later in the day, because it's a similar concept by Yom Tov as well. Anyways, okay, so again, certainly if you have no other food, I might even say that there's what to say about if you just have a bag of potato chips, there may be grounds to say that you can use the food. Anyways, ulafiza the chola heter who lo pas achelech. Look at the core here. The reason that there's a heter here with this situation with the bread. When you have plenty of other food, you have the chicken, you have the cholent, you have the salad, everything. Oh, I don't have the bread. So here, that's why there's a kula. That's why there's a leniency, because I don't have any other bread. Afilu betanurim shalanu, even in our ovens today, which we don't use redia, shemavor lekam b'sif zayin, she'em behem mishum redia. There's no such concept of where most people, in days of the Shulchan Aruch, sorry, in days of the Mishnah Berurah, certainly they weren't using these type of ovens in mass. Maybe there were individuals or certain bakers, but most people were not using such ovens where you were scraping the bread off the walls. You are also not allowed to, in our updated to our modern day oven situation. It was baking in the oven prior to Shabbos. It was improperly doing so. It wasn't. There was no krimas panim before Shabbos. So, how much bread am I allowed to use of the thing which was in the oven? And that is the bread that satisfies 3 meals. Now we're going to define that in just a moment here. Lam medalet mizon shalosh seudos. What does that mean? He writes, "V'im b'pas echad shehotzi yesh bo k'dei shalosh seudos." If in taking off 1 loaf of bread from the wall, I have enough there for 3 meals. Shuv aser lirdos. I'm not allowed to do redia on any other bread that's in there. Afal gav de'ein lo l'chol suda kikar shalom v'lechem mishnah. Even though I will not have whole loaves, and I will not have lechem mishnah at any of these meals. I have 1 loaf here. I have but 1 loaf, and I will, after the first meal, not have a whole loaf anymore. Nonetheless, that is okay. Now you're like, whoa. When did I don't have to do lechem mishnah? This is a new rule I never heard of. Okay, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you don't have lechem mishnah, that does not mean you should not have bread. You should wash, and you should have whatever bread you have. You realize that all you have is sliced bread in your possession. Have sliced bread. You don't not have bread. Bread is a staple of fulfilling that mitzvah of a seuda. It is a separate mitzvah. I don't know if that's the right word here. Chiyuv is a separate concept to have lechem mishnah. That's zecher laman. That was, in remembrance of the man that fell in the double portion on Fridays in the desert and didn't fall on Shabbos. The idea of having a kikar shalem, well, that just makes it more choshev. A kikar shalem is a more significant item. It's a more respectful item for the moment and the setting. But if I don't have it, doesn't mean I shouldn't engage with any bread. So here, what you're seeing is that it's, even though I will not have lechem mishnah, so we're balancing different things here, right? There is a problem or a prohibition or some, we'll talk about more in a moment, of redia, of this scraping off of the bread from the wall. It's only d'Rabbanan at best. So you have here a situation where the rabbis want you to have lechem mishnah. The rabbis don't want you to scrape this thing off the wall. So the compromise situation here, at least according to the Magen Avraham, the compromise is get enough bread so that you have enough for each meal, but don't worry about the lechem mishnah piece. Don't worry about the kikar shalem piece. Rather, just have the bread at the meal in the sufficient amount that is required. How much do you need at each meal? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you need to have either kazayas or kibetza, an all's worth or an egg's worth at each of the meals. So you multiply that by 3, and that's how much bread you really need for each meal. Now, of course, maybe there are multiple people at the table, so you need to have that for everybody. Everybody at every meal on Shabbos, I believe, needs to at least eat a kazayas of bread. It doesn't have to be challah, but bread, in order to sort of make that into a meal, one where I'm obligated to say Birkat Hamazon. Okay. Hopefully, we remember some of those laws from the laws of benching when I first took over the shir 7 or so years ago. So that's that in terms of the kula of the shalosh seudos, the bread. Okay, let's go back into the Shulchan Aruch now. In my edition, it's the 4th line. Ukeshehu roda. When there is a heter to do redia on Shabbos, to scrape the bread off the oven wall. Lo yirde b'marde. You shouldn't do redia with a marde. I don't know if you have this in your edition. I have a perush here. Perush berachas uve mizre. A mizre, by the way, is something they use to winnow, from the word zoreh, like one of the 39 malachos. And a rachas is also it's like a similar. I think you're talking about like some sort of net kind of. I don't know. I looked up these words in the Jastro. I was preparing. These are terms that I don't know. You have a translation there, or no? Yeah, it's some sort of like it's a baker's pan. Let's be real here. We're talking about a baker's pan. Targo marde fala belaz. I don't know what fala is here. Laza. I would assume we're talking about is Polish, right? If this is indeed the Ramah, I'm not even sure who's adding this in. I'm not even sure that that's necessarily the Ramah. Bottom line is here you have a baker's pan. Okay, I imagine when you go to in my head I'm thinking about what's that dairy restaurant that my wife and I used to go to a lot. Noidu. We live in the city, right? So they have a pizza oven there, and there's that long, stick with the pan at the end, and they stick the pizza into the oven. Oh, they take it out. That's how I'm envisioning something here. A baker's pan.
Right. There's a few words.
Yeah.
Spatula.
Yeah.
Also, they called it a peel.
A peel.
Similar to the fuller.
Oh, a fuller, because you're peeling it off the wall. Yeah. Yeah. Again, I'm sure it's not exactly like the pizza pan that I'm imagining, but something of that, it has the ability to scrape off the wall. So it probably has some sort of, very thin front end in order to get underneath the dough. Yeah. Anyways, so you're not supposed to do it with the normal tool that's used. That's the key here. Whatever the normal tool is used here is to get it off the wall. Don't use it. Ela bisakin v'chayotzebo, a knife or something else. Use something that's not the normal tool to remove bread the way you would do it on a Wednesday. Don't do that on Shabbos. Shelo yasa, why? Literally for what I just said. Shelo yasa kederach she'oseh b'chol. So you shouldn't do it the way you do it during the weekdays. And he's saying, why can't I do it the way I do it during weekdays? Hold on. V'im efshar lirdos b'shinui. If I can't do it with a shinui here, that's the whole thing here. I'm just trying to do a shinui. I'm trying to differentiate, do it a little differently. And if I'm not able to do that, I don't have a knife. I don't have another way of really honestly doing it in a way that I will successfully remove this bread from the oven. So yir de marda. Then you can use the marda. You can use the baker's pan, which is normally used in this situation. Now, let's take a look at Lamed Hey. Yir de b'marda. Diridias hapas lo have shvus gamor. Using a mardet to remove the bread is not a full-fledged derabanan here. It is not. It's not like as the rabbis, said here. Oh, you can't do this lest you do, because if you do this, maybe X, Y, or Z will happen. Right? That's a classic, issa derabanan. You can't do X because it may lead to Y. Right? It's where where the rabbis are protecting against the deoraisa. There are derabanans which are completely, new takanos from the rabbis. But even something like the Isra of Muktzah, by the way, is an extension of the prohibition of carrying, of Dal Amos B'Rishus HaRabim, and therefore the less I'm moving, the less chance I have of making a mistake with that malacha, for example. So there are many things that are rabbinic decrees which are an extension really of a deoraisa. This is not the case with radia. There's no, if I do radia, it may lead to X, Y, or Z. It may lead to mixed dancing. I don't know. But what's the problem here? I've talked to you about this before. What is uvda dechol? Uvda, the word in Aramaic, means to do something, means asa. You're doing things that are weekdayish. Therefore, that's why it's usher. So it's not a full-fledged derabanan. Here we get into this wishy-washy category of it's a weekday thing. I think I said this before. If it's an uvda dechol, it's an uvda dechol. If it's not uvda dechol, it's not uvda dechol. It's not easy to, for me at least. Maybe others have a grand theory on this. But how you get into the category uvda dechol. Many things are uvda dechol. I use a fork and knife on Tuesday when I eat my meal. I plan to use a fork and knife. I plan to use a fork and knife on Shabbos too. Do we call that an uvda dechol? Meaning, where do we draw the line between what's an uvda dechol and not an uvda dechol? Maybe it feels weird that I'm, using the oven and I'm using a baker's pan and it feels weekday-ish. But so is taking out food from an oven. If it was, doing shahiyah in the oven where does the line? Where's the line? And I struggle to tell you where the line is. I'm honest. Bottom line is here. The problem is an uvda dechol. It feels weekday. It feels weekday-ish. So he says here. Continuing the thought, therefore, so that's why there's already another leniency here. Like, the Shulchan Aruch says, do it or the shinoi. If you can't do a shinoi, don't worry. Why? Because at the core, it's uvda dechol here. And if you have an uvda dechol, where now there is no other possibility, right? As he says, or it's impossible to do the shinoi. I don't have a method to do a shinoi. And I have a need here, I need the bread, so then don't worry about it. Because if it was a real derabanan, we wouldn't necessarily be so quick to say that. Right here, it's in the uvda dechol category. Again, I profess my uvda dechol weakness here. I don't fully understand why it's an uvda dechol as opposed to other things that we do that are weekday-ish, and we do them on Shabbos too. Look, we do try. I will admit, we do, and as we go through Hilchot Shabbos, and maybe we cover some of the positive aspects, the positive mitzvahs of Shabbos, we will see that there is an emphasis on the way we dress should be differently, the way our tablecloth should be different, right? Yes, ideally more beautiful. That of course is in the eye of the beholder. Our food should be more distinguished, more delicious on Shabbos. Everything we do should have some, in the positive sense, a positive shinui, right? That's why people have, some people are very makpid to wear a different belt on Shabbos, a different kippah on Shabbos, and it looks a little, less worn out. People are supposed to try to do things a little bit differently for Shabbos. But here, there's a practical aspect to it, right? There's, again, to use my fork and knife example, you need to eat, right? Are you going to invent a new? Okay, so you use fancier dishes, fancier, utensils. I hear that, but at the end of the day, the processes are the same. So I don't know. I hope you hear my honest confusion in terms of how to sometimes define this. Okay, let's go back in the Shulchan Aruch now. V'im nisana. Let's say you put it in to the oven Friday afternoon, plenty of time, and there is krimas panim before Shabbos. So the bread is it's baked enough that you don't have to worry about the laws of shehiyah relating to it. Kevan delo avan isura, since you did not do an isur. And this is going to make the uvda dechol thing more confusing. I don't have a good answer to this. Whatever question you're about to ask, I don't have a good answer because I have the same question. If you did it properly, since you did not do an isur, and there is a Shabbos need, I'm going to use this bread as my lechem mishnah, as my meal bread for the meal. Rode kedarko, I can go ahead and do Radia normally, meaning I can use the martyr. What happened to Uvda Dechol? Uvda Dechol is only a problem if I make a mistake. What happened suddenly? It's a little bit, unless you want to say that, but not like the Mishnah Berurah, that the shinui here that was previously mentioned is a shinui that's almost like a knas. Like you didn't do it the right way perfectly, so do it, do something differently, as a reminder to yourself. But here, if I suddenly do it okay, so no problem, no uvda dechol. Okay, again, I don't have a good answer to the question. Why suddenly there's a differentiation here? I can tell you that since you did it correctly, I can understand why we're not punishing you or penalizing you. That's why it almost feels like the previous halacha is not as much a uvda dechol, the way that the Mishnah Berurah wants to explain. It almost feels like a kanas, like a penalty. Like we'll make you do it a little bit differently because remember, hey, next time remember, kid, like don't do it like that. Okay. Last part of that phrase, let's say I was baking something on Friday afternoon and it bakes into Shabbos, but it was already krimas panim. But I have no intention of using it on Shabbos. This is my loaf of bread that I'm going to consume on Sunday. I bought challah at the bakery. So I'm not allowed to do ridia, afilu b'shinui, even with a shinui. I have to leave it there. Because why? There's no Shabbos purpose to what I'm about to do. We're not allowed to do that. Is a separate problem. That is called hachana l'chol, preparing for the weekdays. This one, hopefully, we were familiar with a little bit from Yontif concept. You're not allowed to prepare from one day of Yontif to the next day of Yontif. You're not allowed to prepare from Yontif to Shabbos, Shabbos to Yontif. Same thing here. I'm not allowed, if doing this action, even if it's not necessarily usher, if doing what I'm doing right now is for the purposes of Sunday, you're not really supposed to do that on Shabbos. You're not supposed to prepare for the weekdays. If what you're doing is a Shabbos purpose, that's okay. So this always comes up a question: whoa, how can I wash the dishes on Shabbos? Because the next time I'm going to use it is only on Sunday. So I'm of the opinion that washing the dishes or making things. I think I maybe mentioned this at some point when we've been learning over the last number of months, maybe last year, I guess, or so, of Hilchot Shabbat, that the prohibition to the idea of like washing the dishes. If there's a Shabbos purpose, it's only like Shabbos that things are clean, right? By the same token, if I take a book off the shelf, people will do this, by the way. Take a book off the shelf, a sefer off the shelf, whatever it is. How can I put it back? Putting it back is hachana l'chol, so that it's in the right. No, because I remember our leader talking about this in Shir. Oh, because putting away the book, this is a good lesson for children. Putting something away is part of using it. It's not that you're done with it. You leave it on the floor, the toys. You leave the book wherever it was. No, putting it away is part of how you use it. Same thing with perhaps even washing dishes, right? If a Friday night, you have a pile of dishes in the sink, well, you're going to leave it now the whole Shabbos, and now it's the sink is not so usable, and it makes you feel disgusted. And so, okay, I can see how that has a Shabbos purpose because it's part of your own Shabbos that you have a clean, that your kitchen is clean, right? It's sort of it's the conclusion of how you utilize your dishes in that example. Okay, so. How did I get on that? Because we said if it's no Shabbos purpose, you're not allowed to do it, even if it is shinui. Okay, take a look at the Mishnah Berurah.
But can't you always say, well, I might have guests that stop by, uninvited guests, people I didn't expect, and it would be really horrible if I didn't have enough bread for everybody.
Well, the reason that
so even though it's not sufficient, it's too much for your immediate family.
Right.
You could say, I want to be welcoming to anybody who could come to my door.
Right. By the way, what Hinda's saying has halachic precedence. That's the whole basis of the Eruv Tavshilim.
Right.
That how can you prepare from the Yontif to the Shabbos? Because, which is, by the way, a very serious svara, because we're talking about an Issa D'Oraisa of you're not allowed to do things on Yontif, like cooking, if it has no purpose for that day, it's only that which you have, right? The heter of cooking on Yom Tov is only, ochel nefesh, like for that day, right? If I do ochel nefesh, it's not for then. Actually, that becomes a doraisa of cooking. Cooking is only permitted when it's permitted. When it's not permitted, it's still a very serious prohibition. So we say that because guests may show up, and therefore I'll need some food late in the day on Yom Tov, therefore I'm allowed to cook. Then the rabbis on top of that required Neiruv Tavshilin as an extra requirement to permit the cooking. But the Oraisa Svara is what Hinda's saying. Now, the reason I might argue with what you're saying is because the bread is still there, right? If I need to do further Radia, so it's there. So if I do have guests show up at the time of Shalosh Shudas, let's say, the answer is yes, I should be able to pull it off of the wall.
Yeah, but by then it's burnt. By then it's burnt. I mean, you're just leaving it on for 18 hours. It's going to be worthless.
Right. That's a possibility. That is a possibility that depending on the intensity of the heat, right? The heat is obviously going to slowly dissipate because we have no opportunity to add to the heat source. But your point is well taken. Look, if you're going to burn it, if it's going to burn, yeah, I think you have to be, yeah. I don't know. No one mentions that. I think you have to go by. I think you're looking. It says here, like you can go around asking other people. By the way, do come and take whatever you need. So you are allowed to include other people in the calculation, but they have to have a genuine need. It's an interesting question. Nobody says anything to that effect. But if there was a legitimate, let's say I know that I invited people for Shalosh Shudas, and they don't know that I had this problem. And of course, I should pull enough. If let's say I have 30 guests, I'm making a big Shalosh Shudas. Yeah, so then you could do it for sure. Question is if you don't know and you're like it's on a maybe basis. I don't know. Nobody says you could do it on a maybe though. It's a good point. It's a very sharp question. I will commend you on that. It's a very sharp question because you're using Talmudic logic from another halacha to this one. Yeah. Good question. Lamed Vav. Rode Kedarko. You can go ahead and do this normally if you did this in a permissible fashion. And by the way, I would actually add, I don't know, Hinda, by the way, as I'm thinking about it more in my head, maybe that is Tzorach Hayom. Meaning in the first one, there's a differentiation. There we said you can only take the minimum of shalosh seudos, and you can tell other people too. And I think that's it. Like it's people who are for sure gonna, you're taking what you need and what is a known need. Here, when you did it in a permitted fashion, the wording is v'tzorech Shabbosu. There's a need for Shabbos. I don't know. I think there's more room to read it your way, which is part of Torah Shabbos. You know this. I know this. We over prepare for Shabbos. You don't want to have too little food for everyone at the Shabbos table. The question here: does Torah Shabbos mean the bare minimum for the bread requirement? If you look at the Be'er Halacha, which I wasn't planning on looking at, but take a look here. If you look at the Be'er Halacha, Mitzorach Shabbos Rode Kedarko, Medivrei HaPri Megadim, Mashma the Kavanas HaShulchan Aruch. Based on what the Pri Megadims read is that the Shulchan Aruch here means Dafka Shalosh Seudos. Now, he said the Zekari Tzorach Shabbos. That's called Tzorach Shabbos, the minimum. Ve'ein Buchrach Zeh Bekavanas Haran Aniyus Dati. He said, I don't think that's what the Ran meant when he talked about this halacha. V'od Ef Shalom, meaning that Tzorach Shabbos is not necessarily the minimum. It could be exactly what you're talking about, Hinda, which is the way you would prepare for Shabbos, which is for normal people, we over prepare for Shabbos. V'od Ef Shalomar De'imur Otze Lecho Mipasel Shehotzi Gam Zekori Tzorach Shabbos. The dafka le'el shehidbik be'isser hisna shulchan aruch she'ein lo ma yochal pas acher aval lo bazeh. Here we didn't have a restriction where it's like, oh, if you there was no, oh, I already have. I went to the bakery. I got challah for all 3 meals. Nobody said here, oh, only if you don't have. It's framed differently. The Prima Gautam's understanding is probably not the pshat. The pshat is probably like he's implying, which is this is not just about the mazon shalosh sudos here. It's Orach Shabbos. If you have a legitimate plan that this may be used on Shabbos, so that may be used on Shabbos. That's how I read this now. With what you said and looking at the Be'er Halacha. So thank you for the clarification. I think in the case of the first situation, there I feel very confident to say no. They were giving you one hat there, which is you don't have anything right now, so I'm letting you take mazon shalosh sudos. The rest, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to let it burn. Here, you did it correctly, so I don't think you should be penalized for doing it correctly. If there's no need for it, let's say I have loaves and loaves of bread, and I know what I just baked this for Sunday, then okay, maybe turn the fire off before Shabbos starts, and you'll leave it there, and you'll pull it off the wall, Motzei Shabbos. Okay, sorry about that. Lamed, thank you for spurring that thought. Lamed Vav. Rodekedak over Sefer Elia Rabbah, cause of the Yesh Lahachmir, and by the way, not surprisingly, here we have a Chumrah. Some are Machmir. What's the Chumrah? Don't be surprised at all. Even if you did it beheter. No, you have to do a shinoi with the Radia. Because why? This is at least more consistent. Over the chol. At least if you're going to say it's over the chol, it's consistent to say you have to do it across the board. I don't know. This doesn't. This whole parsha is very confusing.
It's a shvut.
It's less than that. That's what the Mishnah Berurah just said before. It's less than shvut. It's uvda the chol, which is why if you can't do it with a shinoi, you can still do it. It's less than that. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the Ramah here. B'chol zeh, he writes, B'chol zeh she'eno tuach betit. When does all this halacha apply? When the oven is not covered with a clay covering, right? Which is sort of an additional layer of covering, not just like the door of the oven or whatever. We have a clay covering, which serves as a very serious reminder. Hey, don't break this open, and Shabbos, yada yada yada. Aval imhu tuach betit, if it is covered in clay. Oh, she'eno ofel etzorach Shabbos rak lemotzoi Shabbos. Or let's say you're baking. You're not baking l'tzorach Shabbos. Oh, I haven't seen a watch, but it's possible under some of these things here. Sorry. If it is not, the Ramah says if it's not baked l'tzorach Shabbos, what's baking is not for a short, but I'm baking I have a big party Saturday night. I want to be ready for my big party Saturday night. The yesh lo zman le'efoso. If there is time for it to bake, so mutter to lokas v'im b'chi hagavna shema yichate. Now I have to leave it in there. I'm not allowed to do radia on Shabbos, but let's say before Shabbos, there's enough time for it to bake. And here, when I say bake, what do I mean? Lamed ches. We'll come back to lamed zayin in a second. Le'efoso dafil belochi to yenefehete. I mean, without playing with the coals, it will bake beautifully, and therefore it's going to bake on Shabbos, and then it'll be the product will be finished on Shabbos. But I've closed this thing off from being using it. I've put a clay covering there. I'm not going to touch it till Shabbos. I can't take it out right now, right? I'm not allowed to. So I will leave it there until after Shabbos, but that's fine. I did that in such a way where it's going to be fine, where I don't need to play with the coals. Then there's no gzeira, shema yechata, that I might play with the coals. Okay, that's everything comes back to stoking the coals. Take a look at Lamed Zayin, and we'll read the rest of Lamed Ches. Avalim hu tuach atchilas hasif koi. This is going back on the whole thing. The mutter liting. When is it mutter to do all these things in a situation where there's no clay covering? The lo gazrin and shema yistor hatit biyichate. If it's all those things were when it's not tuach batit. If it's tuach batit, all these things are not. You don't have to worry about these things. Just put it in 5 seconds before Shabbos. Who cares? It's not krimas panim. Who cares? I have a layer there that's blocking. It's like Grufo Kutuma, you might call it. It's like a similar situation. I'm not worried you're going to break the clay covering and then stoke the coals. That much we're not worried. But I understand how today when we do Radia, we don't really do Radia, but how when we take things out of the oven today, in this kind of a situation, how do we do it in a way that is permitted to do so? Do we use, what kind of instruments do we use to remove the bread? Okay, we'll get there very soon. Lamed ches, as we said before, without stoking the coals, it can now bake perfectly, and it's covered in clay. And even though it's not for Shabbos, totally fine. In our ovens, the Magen Avraham writes, today we can do Radia. Again, Radia in quotes here. We're not actually scraping things off the wall. And we can eat that. Even though you have food for 3 meals. Perhaps we are still worried. Perhaps you will happen to eat some of the bread in the oven that's there on Shabbos. And you'll stoke the coals in order to hasten the process of baking this. And again, here, again, we're talking about the situation as you look at Lamed Vav in the Shara Tziyun. So again, this clarifies to me that the case here we're talking about is when I have no plans to eat the bread. I baked it, dafka, for the party on Saturday nights. So maybe there are some things that even in our ovens where we don't do Radia, where we have to be careful, because again, without Radia, it's easier to remove things from the oven without this whole potential isu, or whether it's uzah, the whole, whatever. Bottom line is, there is still some level of fear that relates to our ovens because of the easy access that we have to taking the bread out. And so like, maybe we'll change our mind in the middle of Shabbos, even though I had in mind when I put it in, this is for Motzei Shabbos. I put it in Friday afternoon. I might change my mind. I might play with the fire in order to then easily, pull it out and eat it. There's no clay covering here to speak of. So we'll cover Siv Zion when we get there, which talks about the more modern day situation of removing it, where we've moved away from Radia. But this hopefully gives us a sense of the basic principles that are at play, which we'll have to then apply to Tanurim Shalanu situation when we talk about that next week. Okay, I think we'll stop here. Before we get to Siv Zayin, we'll have Siv Vav is going to be a fun one. It's not really practical at all, but it does speak to to when does the prohibition of bishul take place, or afia? Does it take place when if I say I do something on Shabbos, I put something on the fire on Shabbos to cook? Is that moment that I put it on the moment of the violation, even though it has not cooked yet? Or does the violation occur once the food has been cooked? And therefore, there's a nafkamina. Can I save the food? Can I save the food? Can I save myself, or can I save other people if I see they made a mistake and they walk away and they think what they're doing is fine? Do I have an obligation to pull off for the fire the mistake that they just made? So we'll talk about that again. I'm not sure how practical and relevant it is, but we'll see how we can save people from the Isur or the penalty of skila next week. We're saving one life at a time here in this year. Okay.